Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colette Watson, and you are watching Free Press Live, your weekly source for updates and live discussion of what's happening in the world of communications rights. Thank you so much to those who are watching us via Facebook and YouTube. Please jump into the comments and tell us where you're tuning in from. I'm broadcasting live from Phoenix, Arizona. Free Press, of course, is headquartered in Washington, D.C. And today we are talking about digital threats to our democracy, specifically algorithmic bias, which has real world consequences, especially for people of color. But big tech platforms consistently evade accountability. Our Free Press colleagues, Nora Benavidez and Rose Lang-Maso, are joining me today to discuss algorithmic bias and what it will take to build an inclusive digital future for all, and why this conversation should be in the lineup for the 2022 South by Southwest Conference. There's so much to discuss. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with today's headlines. Welcome to Free Press Live. Hi, I'm Colette Watson, and this is Free Press Live. In today's headlines from the world of communications rights, T-Mobile confirmed in an announcement on Wednesday that hackers who recently breached the telecom giant managed to steal a bevy of personal data, according to motherboardadvice.com. That personal data includes social security numbers. This news corroborates some of what a hacker linked to the theft previously said when Motherboard initially broke news of the breach on Sunday, and signals the severity of T-Mobile's latest data exposure. The announcement says that the breach impacted 7.8 million current postpaid customers and 40 million former or prospective customers who applied for credit with the company. Some of the data accessed did include customers' first and last names, date of birth, social security number, driver's license, and ID information for a subset of current and postpaid customers, according to the announcement. It's not clear to consumers in some places and does not explicitly let us know which types of information were included. But for people applying for credit, such as those customers who actually needed that with T-Mobile, there are concerns. We'll be watching this announcement and continuing to advocate for strong privacy legislation, and of course, reining in of telecom giants, which we talk about so much here at Free Press Live. But today we're going to talk specifically about big tech. Digital threats to our democracy, to the ways that people of color are able to access basic democratic rights as well as basic human rights. I'm so pleased to welcome today our new colleague, Nora Benavidez, as well as Rose Lang-Maso, who are going to talk to us about algorithmic bias and building a digital future that is inclusive for all. Welcome, Nora, and welcome, Rose. How are you today?
Oh, Colette, it's so great to be here. We're great. At least I'm great. And thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're doing well.
Absolutely. It is quite a pleasure. I know that you all have been working hard on these issues, and so I want to jump right in and thank again our viewers who are watching, and let you know that if you have questions for Rose or for Nora, please drop those into the comments and we'll answer them live on air and give you a shout out in the process. So I want to start off with the first question of just what is algorithmic bias? Say that 3 times fast. We think of algorithms, though, as something that's like neutral and technical that can't have a bias, right? But you're saying that's not the case. So if you don't mind, break that down for folks who are watching.
Sure. I cannot say it 3 times, so I will not. But, I sort of want to take a step back. And I don't know about you, but I feel like disinformation is in the headlines, in the news every day. And everyone's always talking about, super spreader of this, content that's taken down, COVID disinformation at the hyper local level, maybe in a certain community. There's disinformation that the election was still stolen. There are so many narratives that get pushed out. And there's a lot of focus on that content, learning about it, monitoring it. What I think we sometimes don't talk about as much is the systems that the platforms have in place that are elevating that problematic and harmful content. And those systems, or what we call the algorithms behind how the platforms decide what to show us and what not to show us, that obviously isn't neutral. There are humans behind it, and so there is bias implicit in those algorithms. And what we've learned is, as they curate content on our newsfeed, so much of what gets elevated is the most incendiary, the most controversial, the most engaged content. And what maybe Colette you're seeing, what Rose you're seeing will be very different from what I am seeing. And a lot of that is predicated on who we are and how the platforms determine or categorize who we are. That means our race, our gender, other categories, and ways of sort of differentiating us. And I think sort of why we're here to talk about that today in particular is that both things matter. It's absolutely important for us to talk about the problematic content itself, but it is just as important for us to talk about the platform's role in how they are determining and elevating problematic content for specific users. In particular, I think that those are communities of color, Black, Latinx, Indigenous, other non-English speaking communities.
Well, I am so grateful to you, Nora, for sounding the alarm on what's really happening here. And the fact that, I think sometimes, especially when I think back to the early days of, say, Facebook, when you had to have a college email address to log on, I think we sort of think of it as this neutral, just bulletin board where content just appears according to who has posted it chronologically, which we don't want to get into the chronological post debate in Instagram. I know that's a sore spot for Instagram users, but what you're saying is that it all is actually intentional. There's an algorithm behind it. There's a business model behind it. And that there are, of course, people who are making value decisions every day to determine and select what we actually see, particularly the impact of that for communities of color. And you mentioned Spanish-speaking communities. Could you tell me a little bit more about how this spread of harmful content particularly impacts non-English speakers, Spanish speakers, and other vulnerable communities?
Absolutely, Colette. I'm happy to take this one.
Awesome.
So again, like we've said, architects of these algorithms aren't neutral at all. They are primarily men, and they are far overrepresented in this field where Latinx folks and Black folks are underrepresented, right? And so this means the programmers' biases are going to be implicit to the algorithms that they create. This specifically harms communities that aren't part of the conversation, including non-English speakers and Spanish speakers in particular. So in this way, the technology that says, it's completely objective, this promise of objectivity is actually super empty and doesn't have a real basis because existing inequalities outside of the tech space are reproduced. So this is a major problem, and we need to think a little bit more carefully about, okay, who is building the back end of these algorithms, who maintains them, and how do they work? Because right now, none of that is transparent. And we saw that disinformation suppliers really take advantage of this. And we saw that in the 2020 election cycle, as well as now with disinformation relating to COVID-19 and vaccinations. So they particularly target voters who they believe to be quote unquote vulnerable to this disinformation, because they know that they are not, these platforms are not moderating for disinformation in these other languages as carefully. And then, the algorithms work in many ways, just like Nora was saying at the top. So there are really two pieces here that we find concerning. The first piece is that algorithms spread hate and disinformation on social media because, again, that content is the most shocking. And that's how they make their money, right? So if there's content that's interacted with a lot on social media, there's higher levels of engagement. And that means that platforms make money. The shock value is a moneymaker. And so we need to think about what types of content these platforms are profiting from. Groups specifically pushed disinformation about the election to people of color. We can think a lot about the Blexit movement, which was encouraging people to not vote at all, specifically Black folks. And then also about things like the time of the election and how to vote. This continues now, especially in Spanish and other non-English languages about vaccines. So it happens on the content side, Colette, and that's a concern. But it also happens on the advertising side, where, like Nora started to mention, you can target people with your ads on really, really specific characteristics like gender, location, age, education level, and most importantly for our context, language, which is a huge concern because then disinformation and bad actors who supply this disinformation can target specific communities. And that's why it's such a major concern in non-English languages as well as English.
And Colette, I just want to jump in. One other thing that Rose has sort of, helped flag for me is in thinking about the link between how we think of what's happening online and then what those real world consequences are. When we talk about things, even a phrase like algorithmic bias or a contrary phrase like algorithmic justice, where we would push platforms for greater accountability and equity in the way that content gets curated and shown to different users. Those are really abstract concepts. And I think it helps to just bring some of the examples, as Rose mentioned, to bear, whether it is the way advertising on Facebook creates disparate kinds of loan repayment plans for Black Facebook users, where their repayment loans are higher and more steep than others. We've seen that where white homeowners have credit scores because they're higher than Black homeowners, they're getting better rates than their Black and their Latino counterparts. We've also then seen that, algorithms and their decision systems in general will create different kinds of parities where students get screened out of better schools, where auto insurance is more expensive for communities of color and users like Black, Latino, Native Americans. And then this extends all the way through other sort of crucial democratic processes like voting, the ways that we think of how our elections matter and how our votes matter. So when it comes to Black voters being targeted in 2016, they were very uniquely, aggressively targeted with content to make them feel like their vote wouldn't count. And likewise in 2020, Latinx, Spanish-speaking voters, particularly in and around Florida, were targeted with content that made them feel potentially, or could make one feel, like the election was going to be rigged and that it was corrupt. And so all of these together, I think, are important anecdotes that show a backdrop where absolutely what happens online trickles out into real world consequences and often will create disparate ways of engaging, connecting, even communicating with each other and with our democracy.
That's so important, to point out, because I think we have this sense in larger society that there's an online world and an offline world and not really the interconnection between the two. So thank you for that. Can you all tell me a little bit about, who is architecting that online to offline world and how sort of these biases are making their way into the design, right, of our algorithms or in our online world that then creates real, structural failures in our lives?
Sure. Well, I can kick us off, and then I'm always going to turn it over to Rose as well. But, I think the short answer is we know some of who is involved and what the architects, if you will, of algorithms are. They're humans. But we also know that men are overrepresented in this field and that experts of color are underrepresented. And so there are natural and implicit biases that all of us have. I have them, you each have them. But when particularly white and particularly men are overrepresented in these fields, that means that as they are creating, as the architects of these systems that are categorizing how we are shown content, their biases are baked into how we are being given curated content. And so it's, just important to keep in mind that there is always going to be the kind of human element when we talk about AI, when we talk about the kinds of biases that are implicit in these systems.
Absolutely. And this continues to spiral as these artificial intelligence platforms learn more, right? So if they're programmed by somebody who has certain implicit biases and those aren't checked by other people who are doing that type of machine learning work and programming work, these inequalities can continue to reproduce, which is a concern that we have when we think about the lack of transparency around algorithms.
Absolutely. And I just want to underscore what y'all have said a number of times here, that yes, we are concerned about content producers, but what we're really talking about today is the scaffolding, if you will, of that world where we go out and we have these conversations and we share this content. So you mentioned the human element, though, there. I want to talk about the human element that both of you represent. I'm going to go off the farm for a second here and just ask, what brought you to this work? What makes you passionate about, building a just digital future? Why do you care so deeply about it? Because I can feel your passion coming through. I'm going to start with you, Rose, and then go to Nora.
Going off script on me here, Colette. That's fine. I think what really brings me to this work is my work over the past year and throughout the 2020 election cycle for monitoring for disinformation across platforms, including Facebook, which we're on right now, Twitter, Instagram, Nextdoor, and others, and seeing what a direct impact that disinformation had on election turnout. I really want to pursue civil rights work moving forward, and I see voting rights and election work as an emerging civil rights issue. And that's the case online as well. I've grown up as a digital native. I'm on the younger side of the team. And so I've always seen how social media and how other online platforms work to either divide or unite people, to either lift people up or bring people down. And while a lot of people think that the internet is some type of great equalizer, there's a lot more to it than that. And sometimes we see things that aren't so great. For example, algorithms that push content just to get engagement, even if that means it's spreading lies and hate, right? And so for me, I'm interested in trying to interrupt that cycle and instead create, alongside the rest of the team, an internet and a way of thinking about just our digital world that does not need to be so divorced from the real and physical world, which is something that we're talking about here, right? Of like the connections between what happens online. Like, for example, the spread of hate and the big lie around the election that then can lead to events like the insurrection on the US Capitol on January 6th. And having that clear understanding and wanting to have a way to disrupt that and then build a digital future that's actually positive and progressive rather than simply reacting to all of the things that are wrong.
I love what you said there around particularly the way we think about this stuff. Do y'all remember that commercial a while back where the person said, and everything on the internet is true, and it was kind of a joke? I feel like that was a year or two ago. And then now it's kind of coming true where, especially around the COVID disinformation that's being spread, there are people who really feel that things they've seen on the internet represent absolute truth and are making life decisions based on it. So I really love what you had to say there. How about you, Nora? What makes you passionate about building a just digital future?
Oh, well, I love that you went off script. I always think it's critical to go off script and really kind of dive into the people behind the passion and behind what we're thinking about and thinking about innovating. I've been a civil rights lawyer for many years, and from working on, like in-person ways that people's basic human rights are violated, free speech rights, voting rights, journalist rights, and media access in courtrooms or in other kinds of political proceedings, all the way through then thinking about the new frontier and the way that the internet is what I believe the newest frontier for civil rights violations. I think that scaffolding is the perfect word that you used, Colette, and that there is really only one major problem to tackle, and everything flows out of that there are always going to be equity barriers where access and opportunity for people to make decisions and to make decisions for their best lives will always be unequal. And those inequalities play out across class, across race, across geography, across what you were born into. And that, to me, is fundamentally unfair. And the systems then that perpetuate those types of barriers and inequities are things that I think we at Free Press, that I as an individual, as a civil rights lawyer and as a digital justice fighter and advocate, I think that we are really kind of responsible now in making the link for people to building urgency and telling others this isn't something that's your neighbor's problem or a problem in some rural community you've never heard of, or a headline for an article that you couldn't actually access because there's a paywall. Like, these are issues that are critical for all of us. And building the kind of empathy and urgency is what I think the work is all about. So when I think of algorithmic bias, to me, that is full of opportunity for us to talk about why is it that we don't feel like our voice matters? Why and how can we build something like a digital future where we are curious and we care? And we care about our own voices and we care about each other's. So that's why I'm passionate about it.
Well, I love that future. I want to be in that future with both of you.
Well, I want to be in it. I don't know if it exists yet, but we are building it, Colette. We are building it as we're flying.
I think so. I definitely think so. So speaking of the future, as I teased a little bit earlier, there is an event coming up in Texas. We know everything is bigger in Texas. And so with that event, you all are looking to sort of expand awareness of algorithmic bias and bring it to a particular stage. Tell me about your plans for this talk. Before you do, though, I have to remind folks watching that this is Free Press Live, your weekly source for updates from the world of communications rights. We're talking about algorithmic bias with the amazing Nora Benavidez and Rose Lang-Maso. I'm Colette Watson, and we're talking right now about a special event coming up in Texas. What is the plan for that talk, and what is this event?
Well, I can always kick us off. There is an annual conference in Austin, Texas, South by Southwest. Some of you tuning in may have heard about it. Some of you may have attended. You may have spoken. It's really kind of the most exciting gathering every year for tech innovation. And so we're proposing a panel for March of 2022 to explore all of these issues, what algorithmic bias means, why it's urgent to talk about it, and how can we push for platform accountability in the mix. And so we've put together this proposal with a couple of partners of ours. And I'm so proud really to just tell you briefly about it, because I think that it's important to start marrying so many of these coalition efforts. There are fantastic, meaningful, innovative conversations happening among tech experts, tech accountability, and social media platform accountability experts. And then there's this other world of civil rights and voting rights groups that are really trying to hold down the fort, fight for equal access to the ballot. And ahead of 2024, ahead of 2022, we need to start marrying those and really talking about what are the human elements here when we talk about tech accountability. So we're bringing a friend of ours, Yael Eisenstadt, who is the former head of global elections integrity at Facebook. She's now a member of the Real Oversight Board. We're also bringing Ensei Ufat, who runs the New Georgia Project and is a luminary in her own right, a voting and civil rights expert. And we're hoping to bring this panel to everyone who's tuning in, who would be at South by Southwest, who wants to kind of hear about the equity lens, the digital frontier for all of these digital justice rights issues.
Amazing. Rose, tell folks, your thoughts on the panel and also how we can help make it real.
Absolutely. So Nora is far too modest because she is also one of our esteemed panelists. So if you'd like to hear more from Nora, as I can't imagine why you would not, she will also be at that panel. Again, I think it's so exciting because the work I hope to devote my life to moving forward is at this intersection of civil rights and technology policy and applying an equity lens to platform accountability work. Right now, I think terms like, algorithmic bias, algorithmic transparency, algorithmic justice sound really wonky, right? And not particularly relatable. And so something that we're trying to do at this panel is have a meeting of the minds about this issue, make it one that people start to talk about more regularly, and something that becomes less just something that we care about and something that the broader community online cares about. So you may notice in the chat here in the comments, we have a link. What we'd like you to do is to click the link and make an account for South by Southwest. You confirm your account by email. Two-factor authentication is good, folks. It makes sure that you are the one in your account. And then from there, on the left-hand column, there's a button that says Vote Up for our panel. So you can see a description of the panel. You can see the people who are speaking. You can see a little more context about what it's about. And then you will vote up the panel. There's a process for the South by Southwest conference where 30% of what determines if your panel is selected are votes. You can only vote once, so it's a one and done situation. And we really, really appreciate you voting us up. You also may see in other issue areas panels that look interesting, and feel free to go ahead and check some of those out as well. So again, we're going to ask you to vote up our panel. You can see the link in the comments. You'll make an account with your email address. You'll confirm that account, and then you'll click Vote Up in the left-hand column.
That's amazing. Vote up. So I want to take a moment and turn to the comments. We have a couple. Nora and Rose, you're really resonating with our viewers here today. Malachi, and excuse me if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. In fact, my eyes deceive me. I think that's Malika Trendy, says, I want to see this term algorithm bias going viral. We do too, Malika. We want to see this term going viral too. And I think a great way for that to happen is for you and for others watching to tweet about what we're discussing here today. Talk about algorithmic bias and tag @Free Press so that we can amplify you. Tell folks that you're voting for this panel. And also tag, Free Press in those tweets, and we'll make sure to amplify you, because together we can really amplify this conversation, particularly via South by Southwest. There are a couple other comments there. Please keep talking to us, everyone. Carla Holder says that they love O'Neill's book, Weapons of Math Destruction. Thank you for sharing that, Carla. Definitely want to encourage folks to take her up on that recommendation. And also, I just want to thank you both for being here today, Nora and Rose. The work that you're doing is incredible, and we really appreciate you bringing awareness to this issue in the ways that algorithmic and the online structures of bias deepen and perpetuate the inequities we know are real in our world. Thank you so much for the change that you're pushing. Are there any final parting thoughts that you'd like to share before we wrap up? Because we could talk all day, but unfortunately, Free Press Live is a quick 30 minutes every Wednesday at 2:30. So any parting thoughts?
Well, I'll just say one thing about the title that we chose for the South by Southwest panel, and that we specifically reference communities of color. That's really an homage to so much of the thought leadership that other colleagues in this space have been uplifting and bringing forward. Groups like the Algorithmic Justice League, Black, female disinformation experts. I just think it's critical that we're situating this new movement around innovation and equity in what has been, I think, a very long train of amazing experts. And so when we think now about algorithmic justice, not just the bias piece, we want to be elevating victims of how algorithmic bias is truly affecting real communities. And I think that starts by centering communities of color, that centers Black, Latinx, and other vulnerable communities that I think are often sort of just segmented out when we're thinking about how do we build accountability.
Thank you for that, Nora. Special shout out to Yeshi Milner at Data for Black Lives and so many other folks who have been, as you said, building and telling this story for quite a while. Any thoughts, Rose, before we go?
I think just building off of what Nora said, we also need to think about how this affects communities, not just that are English speaking on these platforms, but also Spanish speaking communities and other non-English languages that are prevalent and spoken at home in the US. I think that sometimes we focus so much on the English disinformation that, again, those other languages get siloed a bit. And so that's another topic that we will discuss at the panel. So thank you so much, Colette, for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, for the work that you're doing. I want to close this out with one more comment from a viewer. Our colleague, Vanessa Maria, says, let's talk about algorithmic bias with Free Press and spread more knowledge on this issue. Go ahead and throw that hashtag on it, y'all. Hashtag algorithmic bias. Let's get it going. It started here today.
Yes.
Free Press Live.
Colette, thank you. You have been so fantastic. You are like the MC of our dreams. So thank you.
100%.
Oh my goodness. Well, you made it easy. Thank you. And for folks who are watching and enjoyed this conversation, you can follow Nora and Rose. Go over to @FreePress. You'll see them tagged there. And make sure, again, that you're voting for our panel for this conversation to happen at South by Southwest. That link is in the comments. Vote now. Vote up. Please, please, please. So thank you for tuning in. This has been Free Press Live, your weekly source for news updates, as well as live conversation on what's happening at the intersection of communications, telecom, media, and human rights and justice for all. My name is Colette Watson. I'm Vice President for Cultural Strategy at Free Press, and I encourage you to follow us to stay tuned with what's happening. And also, we don't accept any money from government or corporations. We do this work completely from private donations. And if you'd like to help us keep it going, please do visit freepress.net/donate. We'll see you every week right here at Free Press Live, 2:30 p.m. Eastern on Facebook and YouTube. However, I have to say that next week, August 23rd through 27th, we are closed for a little bit of sacred rest at Free Press. And we encourage you to do the same because it's wild in the world right now, everyone. So make sure that you're getting the rest and hydration and good scientific fact-based information that you need to stay safe. And we'll be back, not this following week, but the next one to give you more information from the world of communications rights. Free Press Live signing off. We'll see you next time.